Let's take a look at the economic week ahead. It was really up and down last week. The rand having a very tough week, remaining volatile at the moment. So we've dragged in with his crystal ball his Econometrix chief economist, Dr. Azar Jammine. Good morning, Doc. Good to have you with us. As we look ahead, I mean, the rand really having a bit of a seesaw last week. The US jobs data not doing us any favors, but at least, if I have it right, we managed to rebound against the dollar late Friday.
I think seesaw is the right word to use. In the early part of last week, there was a general feeling still that the US Federal Reserve Board would raise interest rates more steeply than people had anticipated in the last few months, mainly on account of their concerns that inflation is likely to be far more sticky. Yes, it is declining, but much more slowly than anticipated. Therefore, potentially requiring a much bigger increase in interest rates to bring it down. And that, of course, causes the dollar to strengthen. And that caused the rand to weaken to its poorest level since the COVID crisis in April 2020. It got to 1871. But what we did see late last week was the reverse trend, where even though the jobless figures, the new jobs created in America rose by more than anticipated, so too did the unemployment rate, rose sharply from 3.4 to 3.6%. And on top of that, wage increases were recorded as having increased by only 0.2%, less than expected. And so suddenly people started saying, well, maybe they won't need to raise interest rates as steeply as we thought. And that induced positive sentiment and caused the rand to strengthen all the way to its current level at around 1820. But the fact is that the currency had been very, very oversold on account of not only of the strength of the dollar, but also the country's grey listing, also the news that our current account deficit had expanded. And on top of that, people were worried that economic growth would be very sluggish this year on account of intensified load shedding. And as a consequence, the government would not be able to raise as much tax revenue as previously anticipated, meaning that it would have to borrow more money to fund its expenditure, pushing up the public debt levels. So all these factors have been weighing against the rand in recent weeks, but it got to a point where it was incredibly cheap, and now we see it recovering somewhat.
Yeah, the Friday afternoon recovery, I think, was very surprising to a lot of economists. But right now, we'll take it, of course, Doctor, because whenever we talk about how the rand is interacting with the dollar as well, we start asking questions about our own inflation. What do you expect that to be? Is this going to have a significant impact either way, up or down? And if we talk inflation, of course, all of us are going to be worried about the cost of petrol or fuel. Do you think it's going to have any real effect on us paying more or less for fuel?
Without a doubt, the rand, even at current levels, 1820, has fallen quite a bit. The fact is that it has fallen against all currencies for the reasons I outlined. And as a consequence, I think there will be upward pressure on prices, especially of imports. Fuel, you quoted as one example. And as a consequence, I think the Reserve Bank is going to decide to increase interest rates again when the Monetary Policy Committee meets again in 2 weeks' time.
There's been a lot of talk as well, I see, from municipalities. If we talk about South Africa Local Government Association and consumers taking on solar as well. I mean, how significant is this, especially for the government now giving some kind of subsidy? I think it's up to 15,000 rand as well. Where I'm going with this is more money from government to try and subsidize electricity in our country. Once again, the blackouts and the load shedding, Doctor, is going to have a real monetary impact on government, aren't they?
Without a doubt, it's going to have an impact on government. They've allocated 4 billion rand to provide this 15,000 rand subsidy for individuals, and they've allocated a further 5 billion rand to subsidize companies to install solar. with companies, the incentive is actually quite attractive. If they pay 1 million rand to install solar, eventually they get a tax deduction of 337,000 rand, which is quite significant. All this in order to alleviate the crunch on the dearth of electricity generating capacity. And one mustn't forget that when we get to winter, the demand for electricity stands to increase by another 4 to 6,000 megawatts, because people will be wanting to use it for heating purposes. And then we're staring stage 8 load shedding in the face, unfortunately. So the government is doing all it can, even in the short term, to alleviate that. But one wonders whether they'll be able to avoid this in the short term. By 2024, things might start easing, but a lot has to be done within the next couple of months to prevent us going to stage 8.
There's going to be the critics who are going to say the timing around the elections and possibly the slowing down of the blackouts. Those two are going to coincide very nicely for the ruling party, won't it? That's what some of the theories are. We'll suddenly see a reduction in blackouts as we get to and closer to the elections of next year. Doc, just a brief one from you, if you could. I know we spoke about this with various experts, but I actually haven't had a chance to ask you this, Doc, before I say goodbye. Municipal rates and the way those are increasing, I can't imagine there's many people right now with the rising cost of living that can take another hit like municipal rates going up as well.
Undoubtedly, municipal rates are likely to increase again. The question is how much. Unfortunately, what we have been seeing for several years in a row now is municipal rates rising slightly more than inflation. It's like education. But in the case of municipalities, they're doing all they can to try and sustain their revenues in the face of a lot of delinquency in paying off rates. So brace for it. 1st of July, further increases in rates.
Oh, Doc, it's always good to have you with us, not just talking about one topic. Very kind and gracious with his time is Dr. Azar Jammine, of course, Chief Economist at Econometrix, looking at the economic week ahead.